Hello and welcome to your lesson on the scientific method. So, what is the scientific method? The scientific method is a step-by-step process followed by scientists when they try to answer questions. It will change depending on the question being asked, but in general, it has a fairly standard process, and it will always start with a question which is followed by a hypothesis. And the overall goal is to solve a problem in a repeatable way. So what we're going to be looking at in this lesson is what is that step-by-step process and the idea of a hypothesis, how exactly would we form it? So as we move through here, the first thing we're going to look at is the actual process. So first of all, you make an observation, which is then followed by a question, because all science starts with questions, and scientists by their nature are going to be very inquisitive. You then formulate a hypothesis, you design a controlled, repeatable experiment, you collect and interpret the data, you then evaluate your results and form a conclusion, compare your conclusion to any information that is already published on the topic you're focused on, you report your findings in a scientific journal, for example, Nature, and over time, if proven to be correct, your hypothesis may become a theory and then a principle or a law. Now, this is the general process. It is not always as straightforward as this, but this is generally what you're going to do to try and answer and solve a solution. So when you've seen a problem or formed a question, this is what you're going to do to then try and solve that question. So that's the process. What happens if your hypothesis doesn't match up to the results that you obtain as you carry out your experiment? So this is when real science comes into play. In this case, either your hypothesis is incorrect or your experiment is flawed and you need to figure out which it is. And what you can do is you can ask questions like the ones that follow. So you could revisit your hypothesis and change it, or you could redesign your experiment. You have to ask questions such as, was there human error? Did I repeat my experiment for accuracy? Do my results make sense? These are the sort of things you have to think about. And what will happen is you'll kind of get used to this as you try it through trial and error. You'll start realizing, okay, I think my hypothesis was a bit off there, or I didn't really do this experiment very accurately. And then you go back to the drawing board and you go back to the process and you start it all again. So what about questioning and hypothesis? So all science starts with a question. As scientists observe things that they cannot explain, this naturally then leads to science questioning exactly what is happening. And when we question what happens, we try to come up with reasonable answers or explanations, and this is known as a hypothesis. And a hypothesis, by definition, is a proposed, testable explanation based on observation. So you see something you don't understand, you then try and figure out what's happening or what's causing this change to happen in the environment, and then you propose a test to explain this phenomenon. Okay, and after forming the hypothesis, a scientist then needs to plan and design an experiment to test whether or not their explanation actually makes sense. And the way to try and form a hypothesis, think tip. So think, predict what will happen, identify, determine the independent and dependent variables, and phrase it by using the if, then, because format. So if, then, because, and you're using the variables in that if, then, because to really help you form your hypothesis. And this is what we're going to actually try in the coming lessons to make sure we understand how the hypothesis works. So a couple of questions to finish off here. What is the goal of the scientific method? What does all science start with? And what is a hypothesis? Again, that definition comes up all the time, so you need to know it. Pause the video, jot down your answers, come back, and I'll give you the right answers. So the goal of the scientific method is to solve a problem in a repeatable way. All science starts with a question, and a hypothesis is a proposed, testable explanation based on observation. So from this lesson, you should now understand the idea of the process, you should understand the definition of a hypothesis, and you should know how to form a hypothesis using the if, then, because format using TIP.
If you like this video, you'll love our notes. You can get some for free in the link in the description of this video.